Hi, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon. I'm so excited to be with you in Mindset, Brazil. Thank you for having me. My name is Amit Elazari, and I'm going to be talking with you today about the cybersecurity policy landscape and how it impacts you. We're going to bring together a number of case studies from the area of IoT security. And of course, I'm excited to keep the discussion going after the talk, and I'll be there to answer your questions. So with that, let's get started. It's going to be a fast ride. I'm going to be talking about different concepts from policy, from standards, from the technical domain, from the attack surface, bringing it all together. As mentioned, my name is Amit Elazari. I'm Director, Global Cybersecurity Policy at Intel Corporation. I'm also a lecturer at UC Berkeley School of Information, Master in Cybersecurity program, and I invite you to follow me on Twitter and connect after this discussion. A little bit about my personal journey. So as mentioned, I am a lawyer. I'm not your lawyer though, and today I'm not going to be giving legal advice, but I came to California from sunny Tel Aviv. This is my accent, I'm Israeli, to look at the landscape of technology regulations and how it interacts with researchers in the domains of intellectual property, privacy and security and the like. And I became fascinated about this deep connection between regulations, policy, and technology, and how this is an amazing area of collaboration as policies and laws are advancing to attempt to address the innovative landscape as well as the attack landscape. Specifically at Berkeley, I spent a lot of time researching how policies, contracts, and the legal domain is interacting with the concept of security research and friendly hackers in particular. My prior work focused on building those bridges between friendly hackers and security researchers and collaborations using policies, using contracts, and creating those private ordering mechanisms. It is my sister, who you might know from her TED Talk, Karen Elazari. She has an amazing TED Talk on the friendly hacker community as the internet immune system, which I invite you to check out, that kind of opened my mind to the concept of bug bounties and offensive research and how security researchers and specifically external researchers can teach us a lot more about the landscape and how we can facilitate ways to collaborate with that community. I spend a lot of my time, again, building those bridges between the security research community and policymakers and big corporations. And that is also a lot of my focus of my work at Intel, where as a global policy director, I work with policymakers around the world as they're considering policies in the area of security regulation, as well as developing best practices and technology standards in that domain. And today I'm going to give you just a little bit of glimpse of that word specifically in the area of IoT and explain how it impacts you. As mentioned, although I'm a lawyer, I'm not your lawyer, and today I'm going to be talking a lot about my prior work. I'm going to be expressing my own opinion, and this presentation is not legal advice. So as we look at this landscape, especially the cybersecurity policy landscape, which is really vibrant around the world, and we are seeing a lot of initiatives in the area of supply chain, in the area of software security, in the area of IoT, in the area of certification across the board, and even proposals in the area of cryptography and the like, we do see a common motivation, which is how can we use the policy landscape and the regulatory landscape in order to increase security measurability and trust in security and address the evolving threat landscape and attack surface. So what we are recognizing, there simply is a growing and expanding attack surface with external threats, which are also growing in their complexity. And of course, this is very complex. It encompasses everything from things like DDoS attack, denials of service, or malware attacks, to ransomware, to firmware attacks, to physical attacks, phishing and the like, and this is just a glimpse of that landscape. But the recognition of the complexity of the landscape as well as the simple growth of the landscape has sparked a lot of regulatory conversations and policy proposal aiming to both address the confidence in the security of devices as well as increasing the trust in the system. And this presents a unique opportunity both for innovation, but also for collaboration among the different stakeholders in this ecosystem. Everyone, of course, from the security research community, including the external community, to industry, private-public partnership through the standard bodies, and of course, the collaborations with policymakers around the world as they are considering this landscape. Specifically, I would like to bring you today to my own area of passion, which is IoT security. I focus a lot of my policy work. And as we look at that front landscape and bring it to IoT, we are seeing a very unique type of complexity that is associated with the Internet of Things domain. And again, here, things like the Mirai botnet or the denial of service attack, the DDoS attacks that we have learned about in the past are really coming to mind, but there is an increasing complexity in the diversity of different attacks, and especially when we think about the complexity of the edge ecosystem. If you think about the edge, one of the things that are unique is the ability of IoT devices, of course, to be kind of the gateway to the system because of their connectivity across the supply chain, from everything from the node to the network hub to the core network and the cloud. So the fundamental nature of the edge is bringing additional complexity as we think about this attack surface. This brings us to the uniqueness of the IoT ecosystem, specifically from a policy perspective. If we are talking about such a emerging and diverse landscape that brings different technical and business challenges, everything from the complexity of the system. Think about IoT. We have everything from the smart dog collar to the very sophisticated system in the smart factory or election systems and the like in the industrial space of IoT. Very complex set of devices with different market segments, with different business model and costs, with different architectures in terms of the compute, right? Different levels of power and performance. We have the concept of the constrained device, which is a very small, potentially cheaper devices in the consumer IoT space, all the way again to the industrial domain. How do you bring this diversity and fragmentation of ecosystem and think about how to create policies that are effective to address these issues? So among others, we've seen in the policy conversation a lot of focus on some key principles. These are issues like focusing on risk-based approaches, right, to security, where we recognize that the type of requirements should address the particular unique issues and threat landscape associated with the risk of the particular device. This goes beyond just a simple device into the environment where the device is situated. That's where we see a lot of focus on risk assessment and that concept, including in the policy conversations. And of course, you probably heard about this concept of the risk assessment from the supply chain or software security conversations as well. We are also seeing a very important need to continue and support innovations. A lot of the issues and the attack surface challenges are going to be supported by innovation, by security capabilities built from the foundation up, and we still need to make sure that while we are looking at regulating the space, we are continuing to support innovation and, of course, interoperability. This is the idea of creating a harmonized set of requirements that is applicable across different jurisdictions, and that's where we are seeing a lot of focus on technical standards, a domain which I will introduce you a little bit to today. We also see a lot of focus on the concept of design neutrality. This is a key concept in security policy. The idea is, as we are thinking about regulation and legislation in the space of security, we also recognize the dynamic nature of this landscape. The attack surface continues to evolve, technology and innovation continues to evolve, and as such, we don't want to create a situation where regulation and legislations are standing behind because they attach or bake in a specific concept that would not basically hold the test of time, because the technology that is prescribed in the regulation might become outdated. That is why there is so much work being done in the standard bodies that are constantly amended, that constantly changing to address both the technical landscape and the attack landscape as they evolve. Finally, we are seeing tremendous focus on private-public partnership, and I'll walk you some of these key partnerships today, looking at IoT security, again, as a case study, and we need to think about the IoT device as part of this broader ecosystem. So with that in mind, let's go a little bit deeper, use this landscape of IoT to look at some of the key developments that we have seen in the landscape, mostly looking at proposed regulations, proposed policy, some things that are already in place in effect, and also looking at the standards conversation that, as mentioned, is really, really important, as well as some of the consensus-driven effort we have seen out there. So just as we look at the concept of IoT, we have seen, for example, in the US, both state legislation, both federal legislation. We have seen the emergence of best practices and standards reports. We have seen sectors, particular sectors of the IoT ecosystem, for example, automotive, for example, the consumer household IoT sector or the industrial sector coming together to define baselines for the needs of that particular sectors. And we also see global interactions and how all of the policy in the world is coming together to define the standards together. Going into a little bit more detail about this landscape, let's just look at some of the selected themes and the highlight from the different jurisdictions. So specifically in the US, you might have heard about the federal law. The IoT Cybersecurity Improvement Act is actually already passed. So there is a federal law in the United States that looks at the security of IoT. It is focusing on federal procurement, and there is a lot of focus on the technical guidelines that are developed by NIST to support that work, and I will explain that connection. We also have already in place state legislation in California and Oregon that looks at the security of connected devices. And we have recently, of course, seen, again, the focus on IoT as part of the Biden administration May 12 executive order on securing the nation and increasing the nation's cybersecurity, where there is a specific section that talks about the pilot program supported by FTC and NIST and additional stakeholders, again, looking at the consumer IoT sector. What we have also seen is different agencies looking at this domain, with the FCC recently publishing a NOI, of course, with the FDA and their leadership on medical device cybersecurity, and NHTSA looking at guidelines for cybersecurity. So we are also expecting agency-specific action in this domain. And of course, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the work done by NIST here. Globally, IoT security continues to be a big focus area for policymakers around the world. Of course, the UK already in 2019, with their leadership on the guidelines for IoT, the best practices for IoT, now being evolved into a regulatory proposal for consumer smart product cybersecurity. We have seen in Europe tremendous focus in this domain, both as part of the Red Directive amendments, both as a potential horizontal regulation considered as part of ENISA's and the European Commission strategy for cybersecurity. So we're expecting more traction there. On the best practices and consensus-driven side, we have seen tremendous focus in this area on developing a baseline for security requirements for IoT at NIST, also in the standard body, ETSI 33645, at ISO-IEC, which is a standard that I'm actually one of the co-editors, where the community comes together at SC27 with global participation to define that standard. And we have seen, again, vertical standards like 62443 and others on the rise to support the regulatory conversation and advance our joint understanding of baseline requirements. How is this interacting with other domains of policy? So we are seeing this increased relationship. For example, the conversations around data protection and AI trustworthiness are very relevant in the context of IoT. But of course, there is the conversation around supply chain security and software security, where concepts like the SBOM, the software bill of materials, are definitely on the rise. And they are considered as a supporting capability or something that is also often referenced as well in the conversation on IoT security, specifically in the medical and the grid areas. And of course, we have seen tremendous focus in the landscape on the practice of coordinate vulnerability disclosures. These are frameworks that allow organizations to collaborate with external researchers and invite them as they're testing the system to participate in a program and actually set the expectations on how you can report findings on potential vulnerabilities to organization, and of course remediate them effectively across the ecosystem and collaborate as an ecosystem to release patches to the ecosystem in a way that increases patchability. So all these different areas are interacting together in the policy landscape, and we have also seen focus on certification, on declaration of conformity, specifically for product security and IoT. And here, of course, on the declaration of conformity, their new regime in Brazil Act 77 comes to mind as well. And in fact, that regulation references a lot of these different efforts that you're seeing here on the slide. So high level, the big takeaway from this slide, I think there is a lot of details, is how everything is coming together. I did mention a number of notable efforts to bring together the technical community to define the consensus for IoT security features. This is mostly done by efforts by NIST, for example, like the NIST 8259, which is a really key document. If you're working in the area of IoT security, I really recommend looking at it, but also in the standard bodies in Europe, and of course at ISO IEC. In Europe, we are seeing ETSI and others, the European standard bodies, looking into the implementation of the RED directive, looking into defining standards in this domain, like ETSI EN 303605, which is a consumer IoT standard, so it's for that particular sector. And we are all collaborating together as part of our work in ISO IEC, working on ISO IEC 27442, which is based on security requirements for IoT, a horizontal standard. As we look at the work by NIST, again, I'm not going to go into all the details, but it's important to recognize the public-private collaboration of this foundational work on 8259. In fact, on the left, you are seeing work with tremendous consensus, all the different trade associations here on the left, working together to define this more than 100-page document called the C2 effort, consensus of what are the security features for IoT devices. That work has since matured into two different very important deliverables. First, CTA has developed a standard, CTA 288, where they look at the requirements and provide a more testable and attestable framework for manufacturers to implement for the consumer IoT sector. Second, what you're seeing here on the right is the community coming together and defining security policy principles that policymakers, regulators can think about as they're going about addressing the complexity of regulating IoT security. So I invite you to take this resource and look for more detail and go in depth. Again, not going into much detail around NIST 8259, it is important to recognize that this is a tremendous effort by NIST and the leadership looking at recommendations for manufacturers, both at the pre-market phase, so when the different devices are being manufactured and designed, and the different considerations in terms of the customer and addressing the customer needs, and both at the post-market phase, where they think about issues like communications to consumer and issues around lifespan and support. Again, these are recommendations, these are guidelines, but they are being definitely referenced and considered as part of the policy conversation. Here you can see really briefly some of the unique capabilities that the community is considering as we're looking at IoT security. Features like having device identification, features like supporting the logical access to interface, of course, importance of software updates, which is a key pillar we are seeing in almost every type of IoT security conversation, and just building the awareness and communicating with end users. What's also important to recognize that NIST is now looking into expanding this and building specific profiles. They have just released, as part of the May 12 EO implementation, in draft a criteria for the consumer sector. So that is out there, you can check that out. And of course, they're looking, among others, at NIST 8259D, which is the federal government profile for IoT security that is going to be used for procurement under the federal law IoT Cybersecurity Improvement Act that I mentioned. So one of the takeaways is really the complexity of the IoT ecosystem. And as we are looking at this landscape, one of the things that I'm very passionate about is seeing how we can support the ecosystem as an ingredient provider, really at that foundational level, both in terms of our security architectures and solutions, but both in terms of advancing our joint understanding and working together in the standard bodies to define those technical features, as well as the work we're doing with our partner alliance and others to collaborate with the ecosystem on solutions. Here you can find things like the work we do with the FIDO Alliance on secure device onboarding and specific standards that support those capabilities around secure authentication and configuration. Again, I invite you to check out our different market solutions in the area of IoT and our partner alliance in the area of IoT for more detail. But really my big takeaway and why I am passionate about is because as we're looking at this, the complexity of the policy landscape, we are seeing the emerging proposed regulation worldwide. We do see a very important role for collaboration. And in Intel, a lot of my work is building upon this principle where security comes first. And this is not just about the practices and our technology. This is also about the way we collaborate with the ecosystem. And specifically, one of the areas that I'm very passionate about is how can we work together with our partners to deliver these solutions, but also work together with the security community. So as you're looking at that policy landscape, one of the most amazing trends is the focus on coordinated vulnerability disclosure. There is a recognition that in order to address the emerging attack surface, we need to work collaboratively with the security research ecosystem. A lot of my own prior work, as I mentioned, focused on addressing those legal barriers, those perceptions that reporting could potentially raise implications under anti-hacking laws, and facilitating standardized contract language that can be leveraged as a safe harbor that could be included in programs like bug bounties and vulnerability disclosure programs in order to address this concern. Here we have a lot of resources you can look at, including Disclose.io, again, my prior work at Berkeley that I co-founded. You can check that out and look at that offering and landscape in more detail. But this is also an area that I'm passionate about at Intel, where we work to scale security, including by our industry-recognized leading processes for PSERT, which is how we work with the security research community and also get through the coordinated vulnerability disclosure process and remediate vulnerabilities in collaborations with the entire ecosystem, again, with the end of securing end users and creating patches that are usable, that are delivered to them in an accessible manner. Here, one of the areas that I spend a lot of my time is, again, furthering our understanding and collaboration with the security research community through our bug bounty program, through our CVD processes, and through our PSERT processes. We have seen policymakers increasingly looking at this capability of having processes around CVD, coordinated vulnerability disclosure, and specifically vulnerability disclosure programs and ways to collaborate with the external research ecosystem and support it as a very key foundational capability. We have seen this in areas like the IoT Cybersecurity Improvement Act. We have seen focus on it as part of the May 12 EO, where federal agencies are going to be building in the United States capabilities for incident response and also for vulnerability disclosure practices, where they're going to invite more and more external researchers to report to them vulnerabilities. So with that focus of collaboration, I leave you with this message. If we have any potential friendly hackers or security research here listening to me, please, I invite you to participate in our vibrant Intel Bug Bounty program. We do have also a safe harbor language. You can check it out that addresses some of the potential concerns around legal implications. And we are welcoming your reports and your findings as you are testing out that system. It's been a pleasure to taking you today for this fast ride. I leave you with a strong message around collaboration, and I welcome your questions.